Welcome to another episode of Tech Beyond Gender podcast. I'm your host, Meena Satish Kumar. Today, we are joined by Tracy Morris, a dynamic leader with over 25 years of experience in the IT industry, specializing in software development and integration. Currently, the head of engineering at TradeMe, Tracy is known for her ability to guide large teams towards purpose driven outcomes. Beyond her technical expertise, she's a fierce advocate for increasing the representation of women in technology and technical leadership, working tirelessly to drive systemic change. Get ready to be inspired as Tracy shares her journey, her passion for innovation, and her vision for a more inclusive tech industry. Thank you for joining us today, Tracy. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Meena. Nice to be here.
Tracy, now let's start at the very beginning. Can you tell us about your childhood and upbringing? What were some of the key influences or experiences during that time that shaped your interest in technology and your journey in the tech industry?
I actually didn't have a lot of technology in my life growing up. So 1972, so some time ago, it wasn't normal when I was growing up to have a computer at home. That wasn't really done. We did have one of those sort of ping pong type things I can't even forget the machine that they were on, but very early version of that. So there was nothing really to lend me towards that. I did enjoy maths, where I think a lot of people work in IT have that passion. In my second to last year of school, so sixth form it was called at the time, there were some sort of more broad options that you could choose, so outside of the standard core subjects that you would do. And I chose that year to do photography and also to do computer studies, this weird new thing. And I remember programming, I'm not even sure in what language, a little sort of green turtle to walk around a screen and draw a picture. And I just loved the idea of how you could make that happen. And so I asked that computer teacher what the options were in terms of studying, and he mentioned computer analyst programmer, which was what a developer was called back then. And so I knew about that, and then I decided to do law because I liked LA Law, the TV show at the time. And I did the law intermediate and with a BCom as well, and I didn't really enjoy law, so I just sort of landed into IT after that. So there wasn't, I suppose that was a pivotal moment, but it felt like I just sort of tumbled into it.
Well, which year was it when you started working on that turtle computer stuff?
That would have been 89.
89. And when did you move into technology? Like, when did you land up in technology?
So I did a information systems and management studies BCom degree. So that was where I started working with computers. Even at that time, I didn't have a computer at home. So I would actually go into the computer lab early to be able to get time on the computer. And what you would do is you'd compile your program and then run it, and would see bugs, and you would print out on a sort of a line printer. You would print out your code and debug it offline because you didn't need a computer to do that, and then put your bug fixes into the computer and then compile it and run it again and see whether it worked or not. So that was in the sort of early 90s, 91, 92. Yeah. And then my first job after university was working for ETSL, which was now called Paymark. So the collaboration with the banks that sits behind the EFTPOS system in New Zealand.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you have just been at the very beginning, right? I was just thinking about how you were saying, like in the early days when you had to debug, you had to print it out and then debug it offline. I was just thinking how much technology has evolved since, where we can actually totally destroy an infrastructure up in the cloud if we don't like it, and then just create a new one just like that, right?
Yeah, it is incredible. Although obviously I wasn't right at the start of IT. So some of the people that I worked with early in my career had
Mm.
literally started with punch cards. So back before there was even the technology that I described.
Cool. So how was your first job like?
That first job, I wouldn't describe as pure IT, although it was in the IT industry. So I was on a help desk and we answered phones for people using FPOS terminals and troubleshooted their problems that they were having. So it was hardware based typically. And the answer then, as it is today, was turn it off and on again. And that solved 99% of the problems. It was a shift work job, so that was pretty challenging. But after that, I moved to Fisher and Paykel to the distribution center, and that's when I really got into programming proper. Working with Ingress database as an Ingress database developer and DBA as well for their distribution center.
And which year was it in Fisher and Paykel?
Ooh, uh, what would that be? So, 96 around there.
Hmm. Did you
Yeah.
notice a shift, like moving from the contact center role into a developer sort of role in the 90s?
It was a very different environment. So ETSL was actually in what is now ANZ Tower in central Auckland. So quite nice offices and actually quite high tech. They had pretty cool systems that we watched our key metrics through to make sure people weren't waiting too long. Whereas Fisher and Paykel was in there, so the distribution centre was attached to a factory, and it was. For example, at lunchtime, you would go and get a full cooked meal in Fisher and Paykel, and the people that you would be sharing your meal with were mostly truck drivers. So that was the sort of environment, more like a factory environment. We were kind of in a back room above the distribution centre. Yeah, so that was quite a different working environment. Actually, I was just last week, I went to Google in Auckland, and there was a big deal because they have chefs in their lunchroom that make you a beautiful lunch.
Wow.
But I was like, oh yeah, I remember this from that many years ago.
Wow, nice. So, were there many women in Fisher and Paykel doing technical roles at that time?
No, I mean everything that I've talked through to actually the contact center there was probably quite a few women, but there was a manager that I had at the time, Joanne was her name, I can't remember her surname, but it was very unusual to have women in the IT team. Yeah.
Okay, so over these 25 years, like from Fisher and Paykel now to being in TradeMe, how has the tech landscape evolved in terms of workplace culture?
Mm. So thinking about culture, I would say, unfortunately, there's still not very many women working in technical roles, although in any workplace, so many of our businesses are IT related, and in the workplace there will be women in other roles, even within product engineering teams. It's much more common to have women in testing roles, product owner roles. And of course, there are women in technical roles too, but not as many. I haven't seen, we haven't reached equality there. Workplace culture, I think back then was much more directive. So you just did what your boss said, and you didn't question it as much as employees are encouraged to do now. Sometimes I pine for that. But on the flip side, I can see how to motivate people if you're able to, as you read out in my intro, which I think is from my LinkedIn, if you're able to connect people with why they're doing the thing they're doing and help them to understand the change they're trying to make, you and you reach that sort of autonomy, mastery, purpose triangle that you hope for. I think, yeah, back then you just did your job. So you didn't sort of think to question why. Yeah.
Hmm. So, how did you transition into a management role from a technical role? What triggered that transition?
I've been thinking about that a lot over the last couple of years since I've really started to double down on my work for women in tech. And I think it goes all the way back to London when I worked there during my OE in sort of late 90s. And I have told this story before, but I had it in my team there. I was the only woman, there were 22 men. And it was, I felt like part of the team. It wasn't that I felt that I wasn't part of the team. But as I progressed through technical roles there, my manager sort of took me aside at one point, and he was great, and he actually sponsored me to stay in the UK in a technical role. But he also said to me, it's great having you here. We're just a bit less feral as a result of you being here. And what he was doing was sort of underlying what I brought in terms of team culture and treating each other with respect and trust. And those things are great. But what he didn't do was underline my technical ability, which I know to be the same as the men that I was working with at the time. And so I think that might have been a little turning point. And I think that's not uncommon for women to be appreciated for the communication and engagement skills that they bring to their job, the team building skills, and perhaps overlooked for their technical skills. I also will confess I'm an organizer, a project manager by both nature and also a job. So I then went into project management, which I did enjoy. It's not that I didn't enjoy those things. Project management and operational management after that.
Yeah, when you mentioned something about women being acknowledged for their social skills, I recently came across a research article on how women, when they have to deliver some work for their performance review, their pro-social skills are also considered. Whereas with men, it's about just how well they have delivered a work, not necessarily their pro-social skills as well.
Yes, that's true. And one of the things that does is it creates less actionable feedback. So if you have somebody that perhaps their communication is, and a common thing might be too aggressive or too assertive, a woman might be told that even though she's perhaps saying the same things with the same tone as a man. When somebody tells you that your tone or the way that you speak within the team needs work, the way that you engage with team members or something in those sort of core skills, those communication skills, how do you change that? It's a much harder thing to change that. If you're told, well, you didn't do that case, wasn't that good because of these issues that you had with your code, and I would have expected you to think more broadly about the problem and come up with this other alternative idea. Well, now I know what to do. And so now I know how to improve. And so, yeah, that bias towards communication skills feedback for women and technical skills feedback for men embeds bias and means that you can act on your feedback less well.
Yeah. So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced early in your career, and how did you overcome them?
I remember actually going back to that London time. I remember I wasn't paid enough. I knew that I wasn't paid as much as my peers. And so I needed to advocate to be paid the same. And I would encourage women to do that all the way through your career. Ask other people what they're paid, ask for some pay transparency, and ensure that you are paid the same as your peers, whatever their genders are, and that you progress as quickly. I wouldn't say there's any particular obstacle I faced. I have found that I've never been handed a job. I've always needed to work hard to find the next role and interview a lot. Whether that's a gender thing, I'm unsure. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a particular obstacle, just extra work to put in.
Yeah. This once again about your pay just reminds me of another research that I was reading on. In HP, one of the biggest technology companies in America, there was an internal technical role that was advertised, and they encouraged both men and women to apply for those roles. To begin with, women wouldn't apply for those roles until they knew that they would meet 100% of everything that was listed in the job description. And even if they did meet and they go for an interview, they would negotiate 30% less than what they were willing to offer. And I remember mentioning this in one of the conferences, and one guy came to me and asked me, "Do you know why that is happening?" It's because there are more of us in those senior technical roles, and we network more. We talk about all these opportunities a lot more than women. So we know beforehand what to expect in these roles, like with regards to pay remuneration. But whereas with women, you just don't really have that level of opportunity to network and understand what the market is like, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so do ask the questions of men as well. That that's not uncommon. The example that you gave of where women need to meet all of the criteria to apply for a role and men don't is one that's often used, and certainly at Trade Me in our ads we do say, even if you don't meet all the criteria, we encourage you to apply. So we try to address that. I have a concern that, so what I know to be true, and there's a study that I've read that had a sort of, I can't remember, like so many hundreds and hundreds of countries across, obviously globally, and tens of thousands, might even been hundreds of thousands of participants in a study. And what they found is, regardless of country of origin, women were less confident, struggled with a confidence gap over men. And that's the reason that we find that women feel that they need to meet all of the criteria and perhaps value themselves less well. I just want to acknowledge that the reason for that is not because the woman is somehow lacking. It's because our society devalues their impact, so that they don't feel that they belong, so that they really do struggle with confidence for that reason. We have taught them to be less confident. So I do think that the onus is on the organisation and the people making the decisions about who to hire and who to progress, and not on the woman to somehow be more confident, could get over it. So I always like to put that layer on when we're talking about imposter syndrome, so that we give back the power to the woman and ask the decision makers to change rather than them.
I feel it's not just the decision makers, right? Like you also mentioned that about it's more a societal conditioning as well. Because me, for instance, growing up in India as well, like I have been told as I was growing up that being a woman, this is a particular manual that you follow, and this is the way you behave, sort of. And in certain cultures, it's not explicitly said, but it is just so ingrained in the upbringing, right? You just buy stereotypical sort of toys for girls versus boys, the performance arts versus sports and games. So certain things are just so ingrained. It just feels very harmless, but in the long run, it does have an impact on a woman's career decision and her level of confidence when she walks into a workplace.
That's right. And it's very difficult to overcome that as a woman living in that society. You are getting subtle cues and microaggressions all of the time that you understand that you are lesser than. So while it's not only about the decision makers, it's about a whole society changing, whatever your gender, changing how you behave to create more space for women. There's something that we've noticed at Trade Me, which is fascinating to me, is as we try really hard to encourage women to join our workforce and to be promoted and progress their career at Trade Me, we find that in the technical interview, women drop out. So they drop out before they get a chance to do the technical interview, more than men. And I find that fascinating because I am sure these women that have applied to get past the first interview to be asked to a technical test, they meet the skill and experience requirement of the role. I feel quite confident, based on that study that I mentioned before and others, that they are fully competent and able to pass that technical test. I believe it's the confidence gap that is preventing them from doing the test.
Mm.
What we need to do is change the way that we recruit people to make it more welcoming, to make it less intimidating, to recognise the confidence gap, to ensure that we have women in all of those technical tests answering the questions of the candidate, so that they feel more safe to be able to answer well and honestly, rather than fearfully because they don't know if they'll give the right answer because of that confidence gap.
Okay, I'm surprised, and I'm also pleased that you noticed that many women drop off in the technical skills assessments, because me being in technology, I just hate that process of going through the interview. For some reason, especially when it comes to the technical test, I know I can do it. I've been
Yes.
working in technical roles, but still it just makes me feel so nervous, and I feel like that lack of confidence definitely reflects in the performance as well, how I come across, right? Now,
Absolutely.
I was also reading another research about like how about Ada Lovelace and Grace Hopper. They were like pioneers in tech, right? But those days, this is like in 1960s or earlier, there were many women because it was considered more as a admin sort of role, right, with the punch cards and stuff. But then towards the end of 1960s, it was sort of they just realized the importance of the technology industry, how this is going to evolve and become. Then what happened is they decided to put in a structure, a framework, and create assessments, including the personality, create a personality profile for individuals to work in the sector. And they first landed up creating those personality profiles and the interview process, everything in a way to attract a specific gender. And women sort of dropped off from there on. I was just wondering, have we actually made any changes to the recruitment process in the recent years to accommodate more women coming into these technical areas? Or has this always been the same? Is that something we need to change?
I'm not a recruiter. I am aware of the recruitment process. I know that we did at Trade Me need to make some changes to our recruitment process, and these are not uncommon. Standardized criteria, asking the exact same questions to every candidate. I personally recognize that I was engaging in a conversation with candidates. Actually, that means that the answers that I get from certain candidates are different, and they're able to provide me with more context perhaps than the other candidates where I didn't ask the follow-up questions. So be very careful to be consistent in the questions that you ask so that everybody has a fair chance of answering. One that is perhaps less common is do not talk to the other panelist before you have made your own assessment of that person. Ideally, you'd make a quantified assessment. So question 1, they scored X, question 2, they scored Y. You put that in whatever your applicant tracking system is and wait until everybody has interviewed that person and then come together to discuss your feedback to avoid that bias. Oh, how do you think they went? They weren't that good for these reasons. Oh, and now I'm thinking, oh, yeah, true. They weren't that good for those reasons, even though I might have had a different perspective to bring. So you're sort of preventing yourself from having another perspective. So I do think those things are considered, certainly in terms of how we recruit. We're trying to find more women and encourage more women. I'll mention the merit equation, which is Jess Stewart and Joe Considine's merit equation, where when we think about the merit of an individual, we all know that the meritocracy is a myth, that you can't, differently to perhaps some of the key players in Silicon Valley today would think, you can't assess and select for merit without understanding the context that you live in and work in. So they consider skill and experience. You need the person to be able to do the job. That's a given. And then the other things that they consider to look more broadly to find the best candidate for the role is what difference does that person bring to the team? So we're thinking about a team environment. It's not uncommon to think, when you consider what roles you need in a team, you'd think about the people that you need to join the team to make them the most strong. So don't just think about comparing candidate A and candidate B. Think about what you need to bring into the team. And in many cases, that might be that you need more women. The second one is, rather than thinking about culture fit, are they going to fit in here? Think about what they might add. So think about what the unique contribution that they bring to your organization, not how they fit into what's already there. Otherwise, again, you don't get the opportunity for diversity if you're looking for something like you. And the third one is potential. So really do think about what this person, what this woman has that perhaps you haven't seen through the common recruitment techniques. Look for that potential and value it when you're making your merit decision. So I think those are changes that we can make, or that we have made, to the recruitment process.
Cool. So you have been in technical roles in the past, and obviously you would have also gone through this recruitment process. How was it for you, and how did you manage your technical interviews?
I haven't applied for a technical role for a long time. I'll say that first. Actually, the thing we asked the question, the thing that pops to mind is I did a, what do you call it? A sort of like an IQ test, but like a logical test. I did a logical test for a role in England. And I was in the room for a while doing this logical test. And I know myself to be smart. I wouldn't have got to where I am today without being smart. I, succeeded early on at school and university and through a series of jobs, both in terms of communication skills and also in terms of technical skills. But I struggled with this test, to the point where the person, the interviewer, came into the room to me and said, "Are you finished yet?" And I said, "No, I'm only halfway through." And he said, "Look, we've never had anybody score this badly or do this badly. I think we should just call it quits here."
Oh my God.
So anyway, that's my experience of technical tests. I hope they don't
Did you get that
approach any
job?
longer. No. Like, he literally stopped the recruitment process at that point.
Oh my God. So again, what happened to the next interview following that? This would have definitely shaken you, right?
Yes, but I needed the money, right? And so you just keep looking, you find the job that you need. And I honestly can't remember the recruitment processes subsequently, but I was able to find a job as a developer in a different company.
Oh, so this happened when you were a developer as well.
Yes, yeah, right. That was a technical role that I was applying for.
Oh my gosh. I cannot, it would have been just so, it would have just shaken my level of confidence considerably, right? Like, I just can't imagine how that would be.
Absolutely. I think there is something there, though, if I was to look for the lesson there, in persistence and tenacity. Those are values that I that I hold strong. So, well, a few years ago, it used to be called grit. That sort of resilience to be able to face challenges and fail and then anyway keep going. Yeah, I think it's a really important skill to have.
I'm sure even in leadership roles, right, going through these interview processes will not be that easy. So do you face imposter syndrome either at work or going through these processes for recruitment?
I do. I haven't, if anybody's looking at my LinkedIn, they'll notice that I've been in all of my jobs for quite a while, and I've never, well, just once for 1 month, I've really never done a contract role, and that's because of my fear of not being able to get the next job and my grounding in childhood of being aware of the value of money and the impact if you don't have enough. And so I've always stayed in sort of steady employment, and perhaps stayed at some roles longer than I should have. So yeah, that's not for me, but maybe I can take the opportunity to talk about Trade Me and the things that we've been doing. So I've talked about some of the recruitment changes that we've made. We also recognise that there are less women candidates available, and so we need to apply that broader lens, and we're considering merit, because we know the business value of diverse teams. There is many studies that will show you that you will make, as a business, better decisions with diverse teams, and that will result in better financial performance. So that is the primary reason that we're making the changes that we're making at Trade Me. We've tried many things, as I said. We also find that, so maybe I'll just go into our program now. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So the things that we looked at Trade Me were we wanted to be really goal-orientated, outcome-focused. So we looked at our data to understand where the inequity existed. So we knew that actually we were pretty solid in terms of the percentage of women in tech. Unfortunately, that's not equal, but it's about 30%, which is higher than the sort of industry average. So we just wanted to maintain that. The second one was that we wanted to eliminate our gender pay gap. So in our technology areas, looking at roles, sort of excluding the senior leadership team, but looking at other roles, our gender pay gap was 10% or just over. So we wanted to eliminate that over a period of a few years. And the third thing we wanted to do, which is very related to the gender pay gap, is we wanted to double the number of women in technical leadership roles. So our baseline was 11% in the technical leadership roles. That's as distinct from leadership roles in technology, actually making technical decisions about how you design, build, and operate systems. We wanted to double that from 11% to 22%. So over a couple of years, we've done 28 different things to help to shift that, and they fall into sort of 4 broad categories. So inclusion and belonging, the one that we've spoken about already, so growing our pipeline, finding more candidates. Systemic change, so looking at ways that we can change the way that we make decisions, including about how we select people for opportunities, how we progress people through the organisation. And then finally, looking at equitable progression. So making sure, for instance, that as we make those decisions about who to progress, we have data available so that we can see whether we're being biased on a gender basis. So we did 28 different things, and we've achieved some great results. So very quickly, our sentiment shifted. So how women felt about whether we supported gender diversity shifted. Whether women felt that they had an equal opportunity for leadership roles shifted, although it's still quite low. Just over 50% of women believe that they have equal opportunity for leadership roles. And that's not surprising, because we start our representation at 30%. By the time we get to those technical leader roles, it's 11%. And unfortunately, if you look at the main cohort of technical leadership roles, so that's the lead and principal engineers, where it's about 75%, so 36 people, we only have 2 women in that cohort. So you get down to 6%. So it's not a surprise that women feel that they don't have an equal opportunity for leadership roles. But we did see that shift with the work that we're doing. We also saw our gender pay gap reduce, which is really exciting. We've just published that. So in this, to compare with the baseline that I just gave, we moved from 10% to 6%. So that's 4% in a couple of years, which is great news. We know that we pay people equally. If you do the same role, regardless of your gender, you will be paid the same. We have a process in place to compare like roles, so roles with similar accountability. And make sure that they're paid the same or within the same pay band. But our gender pay gap persists because of representation in higher paying roles is less. So the gender pay gap is comparing the median pay of men with the median pay of women. So we know that because we still have the 6%, we know that we have more men in higher paying roles. We solve that by having more women in technical leadership roles because they're the one that make all the money. So that's what we're trying to do. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to shift that metric. So we are making a decision talking about recruitment to keep so for the first 6 months of a vacancy, we will actually have a preference for women. And I believe that that will create the space to encourage women to apply for roles at Trade Me and to feel more confident that they can progress through the process because they've got the space to be able to do that, and also to give us a bit more time to source women because when you're looking for a role for a team and you don't want to disrupt the velocity of that team, you want them to be able to keep going. So you want to find that person as quickly as you can. Well, if you look on the market and 70% of your candidates and at that technical leadership role, the global stat is about 14%. So 14% of candidates, or if you flip it, 86% of candidates are men. You know what? Of course, you're going to find the man most quickly. It's just the numbers game. So you need the space to be able to find and progress the woman through the recruitment process. Make sure they can do the job. Super important. You're not getting this job if you can't do it, but give them space to be selected. So we think that's an important move that we're making. And we'll watch the space to see if it makes a difference to that 11%.
Wow, this is so impressive. So impressive. I didn't realize that Trade Me was just this committed for building a more diverse team in the technology sector. It's just absolutely great. Just one question that I have for you. You mentioned about the proportion of male and female within technology, that it's slowly increasing, the number of women in technology. Are you seeing it within the technical roles as well, or is it predominantly amongst the mix of technical and non-technical roles?
So sorry, we haven't actually moved the representation. That's the problem we're trying to solve. What we've
Okay.
moved is the ability for women to progress through roles. So from junior, intermediate to senior, which are the roles you can be promoted into. We've seen that improve. So actually in our baseline, the 6-month period that we happened to take the baseline, there were no women promoted. And now it's a bit of a volatile stat because it depends on who's available at the moment, but we know we need to catch up, right? And so we're averaging about 30% of promotions are women in our 6-monthly process. I would notice that because we have that representation gap, we probably need more than that to be able to catch up. But we've seen progression move, we've seen sentiment move, we've seen gender pay gap move. We haven't seen representation move, so that remains at that 11% and 6% for those particular roles we're applying this special measure. And our number of women in technology remains around the baseline. It's actually slightly under it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we mentioned about the pay and how Trade Me has made an effort to make sure that the pay gaps are remedied, right? But say, for instance, if it is someone working in the technology sector, or a migrant woman from a different country has moved into the tech sector, and if they're applying for a technical role as a cloud engineer role, for instance, what do you think they could possibly do to make sure that the pay that is being offered to them for a specific role is in par with what the market is?
That's a good question. I know there are a number of salary guides that you could use out there. I would notice that salary guides typically provided by recruitment companies, and the recruitment companies have a vested interest in people being paid more, and so they can be a little bit skewed than what we find our pay bands are at. I mean, just off the top of my head, I would encourage them to ask for the pay band. So the whole pay band for the role that they're applying for. If that can be transparent to them, that would be helpful. And then perhaps what the median pay is within that pay band. Salaries and market value is quite volatile in tech. We know that a couple of years ago, post-COVID, the demands of candidates were very high in terms of what salaries they wanted, and salaries increased astronomically over that period, and they've settled now. Obviously, we've got higher unemployment now, and we have found that they're not increasing at the same rate. In fact, they're quite stagnant over the last year or so. Yeah, but perhaps ask those direct questions. What is the pay band? What is the median pay? Why do you think that I belong in this end of it? Or, try to get a bit more information to negotiate with.
Mhm. So you mentioned that when you were in London, you noticed that you were underpaid for a specific role, right? Have you experienced that in leadership roles as well, where there was a pay parity?
Honestly, pay transparency as a concept is, I think, quite new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know the band that I'm paid in yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't tell you for sure whether I'm underpaid. Yeah. So I don't know. I've never thought to ask the question. It's part of
Mm-hmm.
the problem. There's a book that I read, what was it called? Something about why women don't negotiate or why women don't ask. That was the name of it,
Mm-hmm.
which looks at the reasons why you don't ask. And I read that going, yep, that rings true. Yeah.
So why would women not ask?
It's complex societal. I can't really remember, but it probably comes right back to that confidence gap that we talked about.
Mm.
You're not trained to do that. It's unsightly or something. You're fearful of doing that. Yeah.
So I
It,
know you're sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking this morning about different books that I've read, and one that talked about the importance of sort of early indicators of how your work is valued and
Mm-hmm.
looking at children. And this book talked about the likely scenario is that when you're giving chores to your children, you might give the girls washing up, laundry, these sorts of things, and you might give the boys lawn mowing, washing the car, these sorts of things. What's interesting about those chores is that it's much easier to monetize washing the car or doing the lawns than it is doing the dishes. And I'm obviously not suggesting that every parent makes these choices, but I think being very intentional about those subtle indicators that help people to value their work is really important. The other thing I was thinking about on that point was when you go to a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
this book talked about evidence to show that if there's a man and a woman or men and women in that group, the likely scenario is the man goes to pay. And people notice that. Your server notices that. If you have children there, they notice that. And you can probably guess that the women in the room absolutely do, at least the equal share, if not more, of the financial management of the household. But that little subtle indicator is teaching somebody that the man controls the money. And so just be very aware of those small things that can help people to understand that their work is valued.
Mm. Now, talking to you, I can really feel that you are passionate about bringing an equal representation of women in technology, the work that you're doing with women in tech and possibly in trade me as well. I'll be keen to understand what actually inspired you to take up this cause.
Mm. I've always been passionate about women in tech for sure. So I've done many things through my career to these ends. The reason I've really doubled down on it at Trade Me is I actually did a course a couple of years ago at Trade Me where we were asked to think about our purpose. And I recited my purpose that you actually read out in the intro there, which talks about the importance of connecting teams and for me, large teams with the change that they can believe in. What's their purpose for doing things? And my learning buddy sort of said, I'm not seeing it. And then it just sort of blurted out that what I really wanted was to be able to tell the stories of women and girls and ensure that their voices are heard and that they have equity with men. And so it really did ignite me. So I really encourage you to think about what your purpose is for any of the listeners. and then just double down on it. And it's not easy. I would say that I am in a position of power. So I have financial security. I'm a white woman. I'm a cis woman. I have all kinds of privilege. And it's my job to use that power to make the change that I see that is needed. And I'm very passionate about the fact that that change should primarily be led by systems change. We need to change the system and ensure the decision makers are making the right decision. So that's my very strong driver.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would say that we're not at a point of equity yet. So unfortunately, what that means is that women, especially women in power, but actually all women and girls, need to continue to do the work. We haven't won the fight. It will be amazing when we can just relax. And my friend actually said to me last night, wouldn't it be amazing if I could just be a beach bum? Like I don't have to try to work hard, to overcome obstacles, to be what other people need to see, to a role model. It'd be amazing if I could just relax. That's true, but we're not there yet. And so I would sort of ask that even though systemic change is what's needed, put in the work. Don't let poor behavior pass you by. Call out poor behavior. Advocate strongly, whatever your gender is, advocate strongly for people that are underestimated or underrepresented. So whatever your gender, but also any listeners who we know that women drop out of the tech industry. About half of women that join the tech industry drop out by the time they're 35. Don't drop out. Stay there. Think about how the workplace can change, how you can place demands. Workplaces want you. So think about how you can ensure that that workplace can accommodate your needs. Use influencers if you're an ally for women, whatever your gender. Make sure that you're trying to create change. Like we can't rest.
Yeah. Now, like you mentioned, right, like we probably need to talk more about it. If there is something that's not right, we have to call it out and stuff along those lines. I was just thinking, like, it's very difficult, right, for many women to speak out about it. The fear of being judged, the fear of losing the next opportunity, job opportunity, next contracting. I remember a few months ago when I was talking to a woman who was contracting, she had several challenges. She would talk in depth and in length about all the challenges she had faced with me. But when I invited her to speak out, she was like, there's no way I'm going to do this because my contract is finishing and I need my next contracting role. Right? So, how do you think that we have created a safe environment in the society for us to openly speak out about it?
No, that's why I prefix all of that with I recognize my privilege. So I totally get it that some people are not able to speak out, but you'll probably know in the organization that you're in or the community that you're in, you'll know the people who are in a position of power who can speak for you. So if you don't feel confident to speak up, speak to them, make sure that they understand your story and ask for them to advocate for you. So we have one of the programs, one of the 28 things that we did at Trade Me was a sponsorship program, and that's very targeted at decision makers advocating for women in the rooms where decisions are being made, where those women are not. So that's the person you need. You need somebody to sponsor you, somebody who you trust, who is in a position of power. Find them or find the influencer for them if you can't go quite to that level, and ask them to tell your story. I just at the Trade Me Christmas party this week, I was talking to some women in tech and asking them how they felt about some of the initiatives that we'd just done. And there was a woman who mentioned what she said to me is, I don't know how I feel about it. I've not been involved in any of this woman in tech stuff because I don't know how I feel about policies based on your gender. Isn't that discriminatory? And that is a very common feeling to have. I don't want to get the job because I'm a woman.
Mm.
That feeling is a very common feeling to have. So I don't want to negate the feeling, but I did talk with her about just observing what's around you. Do you notice that you're a minority here, even though you're not a minority in the communities that you live in? Do you notice that men are progressing more quickly than women, or any of the other sort of symptoms of that underrepresentation? What that means is there's already discrimination.
Mm.
Already live in a discriminatory society. We are already underrepresented in places that we should not be because we
Mm.
have this experience to do the jobs. So sometimes when you're living in that environment, it's difficult to think that this change that we're trying to put forward feels icky, feels
Mm.
discriminatory, without realizing that actually for decades, men have been
Mm.
getting jobs actually because they're men.
Mm.
So it's okay that you're getting this job because you're a woman, because we need to create that change.
Mm.
And I can't be certain, but I think it was interesting for her to think about that and really observe, oh, actually, I do know that that man that I'm as good at the
Mm.
job, they did progress more quickly than me, and really
Mm.
think about that and think about what we need to do to shift it.
Mm. So going back to imposter syndrome, do you still have imposter syndrome?
Yes, of course. So looking at this work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, I have lost friendships and the respect and trust of people that I respect
Mm-hmm.
because of this work, because they disagree with this work. And it does make you really question whether it's worth it, and are you doing the right thing, and should you keep going, despite the fact that it actually takes a personal toil, both in terms of sort of emotional load that it carries, as well as in terms of actual hours. Both of us are working on a Saturday to get the story out. Of course, I experience that fear that I'm not doing the right thing, that I'm not good enough, that I'm barking up the wrong tree. It hits you all of the time. You're always second guessing yourself. But you just have to really connect with the change you're trying to make. So despite the pushback and the discomfort and the sideways glances in your organization, or the people that used to talk to you that suddenly don't, despite all of that, does the outcome matter enough to take you through that confidence gap, that imposter syndrome? Does it really matter that we should get more women into technical decision-making roles? Well, yes. And so then that can drive you forward. I would, it's a little bit of a tangent away from imposter syndrome, but I also think it's super important when you're considering that, whether you're considering whether the thing that you're doing is worth it, that you do observe the facts. So if the thing that you do doesn't create the change that you want to make, stop doing that thing, right? So I'm not going to doggedly persist despite in face of lack of evidence. So we need to see the shifts achieved. We need to inspect the data, understand the sentiment, and then know where we go forward. But assuming that that we have all those checks and balances in place, then despite your lack of confidence, is it worth it to achieve the goal you want? Then do it.
Now, I know some organizations are putting in like sincere efforts when it comes to grad recruitment, trying to get the right balance in place when they come into an organization. But then, as you mentioned as well, by the time they get to 35, some of them drop off. And a lot of them actually move into management sort of roles, or like become a platform manager, platform owner, delivery manager. Not many women stick into those technical roles. What do you think needs to change within organizations so we create a very conducive environment for women to progress up in those senior technical roles?
Yeah. So one thing for sure is that the lack of progression is not because of the lack of skill or experience. So we know that for sure. So we just have to interview the woman and then hire them. It's as straightforward as that. And we need to hire enough of them. So I mentioned before we had 2 of 36 women in that main cohort of principal and lead engineers. It's actually not enough. So they're going to make change, and this is something I've been playing with a bit lately. I observe that, I know that there are studies to show that to create change, to allow people, and I actually heard this on a Kim Hill interview recently from Malcolm Gladwell. He was talking about it, but it's not an uncommon fact. To create a feeling of safety and inclusion for people who are, his word, outsiders, you need 30% representation or a minimum of 3. So obviously in a smaller group, minimum of 3. And the reason for that is because you need to feel safe enough to be able to be yourself. If you can't be yourself, then you're not actually bringing the diversity that is going to create that better performance, those products that recognize who women are. From a technical leadership perspective, that is super important because technology is pervasive, as you know, in everything that we do. And we know that technology products are being designed to embed bias. AI is a great example of how we see that happen. I'll tell you a story about my one of my bosses. We happen to have a 6 woman in our senior leadership team. And so she was creating a story to tell about each of us at the start of a offsite day. And she created the story as if we were superheroes to talk about our particular superpower. And she wanted to create some imagery to go behind it. And so she used generative AI to create those images. And she talked about a senior leadership team in a technology business. And the pictures, the images that she kept getting back were 6 men, or 6 male superheroes. And so she suffixed the prompt with all woman. And I'm not lying, the story that she got back was 6 women quilting.
Oh my gosh.
You try it for yourself if you haven't already. If you look for technology leader or software engineer, the first image that you'll get back will be a white man, for sure. So we know that the technical decisions that are being made and the data sets that are being used and how we train those data sets are not looking for correcting bias. We know, if you've heard of the book Invisible Woman, amazing book, there is so many, hundreds and hundreds of examples of technical decisions made by technical teams that create bias or don't allow for the experiences and the bodies of women. So we need women in those technical leadership roles for sure.
But I was talking to another woman who's an aspiring CIO, and she was telling me that how there's no way she could actually apply for those senior leadership roles because they explicitly say you need to have had like at least 10 years of leadership experience, a minimum. She was like, 10 years ago, the market was even worse for women. So if they are looking for people with at least 10 years of leadership experience, they are going to continue to attract more of a specific gender.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts on that one. One is that it's actually, unfortunately, the stats haven't changed in about 30 years. So we didn't really have worse representation 10 years ago than we do today. That's sad. The second thing is, for a CIO role, depending on the size of the organization, I can understand that you might want 10 years of experience. What I would maybe encourage the decision makers recruiting for those roles to consider is, what is the experience that you're looking for? What is required to do the CIO role? And are there other transferable skills that this person can bring? And also, as I mentioned, that merit equation, do look for potential. And that tends to be in those other types of experiences. But I would also say that it is not going to help if we employ women that don't have the right skill and experience into a role that they're not ready for, because they won't succeed, or they won't succeed as well as the men that are employed in that situation. So I'd say, look for different types of transferable skills. Consider the full merit equation. Consider the difference that this person brings to the team, the better decisions that might be made if there's an all-male team or a mostly male team, if they introduce a woman. Consider the unique contribution that they can bring to that organization, consider their transferable skills, but I'd also not be, I wouldn't like to think that somebody, say, with 2 years experience in a management role, maybe not a CIO role, but a management role, was put into a CIO position. They're not going to be ready, and it's going to be hard, and nobody wants that experience.
Yeah, you're pretty much setting them up for failure then.
That's right. Yeah, and yeah. So when at Trade Me, when we're looking for people for these technical leadership roles, we will look for that future potential. We will look for the difference that you bring. In this case, we know the difference we need as women, but we will also be certain that the person can do the role.
Now, taking a slight different tangent now, what current or emerging technologies excite you the most and why?
I don't really know, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
I observe, I have an EV, and I really love how peppy it is. That's exciting. I find it interesting to think about technologies that are going to help us to combat the challenges of our time. So that being, to combat climate change, to deal with the water crises, to help people to have better livelihoods, those types of technologies. But I also worry about what's coming out right now. I think part of the problem with having a very an industry very dominated by men is that many of the technologies, especially the new ones, are not allowing for the experiences in the bodies of women. So just a couple of examples on that. Actually, one of the first things that popped into my head when you asked the question was my virtual assistant, which is Alexa. She'll be listening now. But what I find with Alexa is that, and it has got a little bit better, but is that if it can't understand what I'm saying, then my partner, who's a man, will ask the exact same question, and she will understand what he's saying. And that's because it was trained. God, don't get me started on why all the virtual assistants are women, but it was trained on language models and on voices that were men. So that is creating. So now you're a girl. Imagine that experience. You're not getting the best answers from your virtual assistant. You're being disadvantaged, even in that small way, in your household. Then VR goggles, it's talked about as well, an invisible woman, but they're not designed for women's faces, and I've forgotten the technical term, but the distance between your eyeballs is different for a woman, and so you get motion sickness much more quickly. Well, when you're playing a game, maybe that's not ideal, but no big deal, right? But virtual reality is now being used to train us, in the tertiary, like medical scenarios, lots of different scenarios. It's a cheaper way to train people. It gives them a much more real experience. Amazing. What if I'm now feeling sick every time I get my training? So then again, that's embedding the bias and ensuring that we continue to be underrepresented if we're not getting the same quality of training and education as men, just for that simple reason that the product was not designed.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge, I think, for next few years, because our languages are not going to change. The systemic barriers are not going to change. What are we going to feed the LLMs with?
Yep, it's a long road ahead of us, but we need to start.
Cool. So have you ever had mentors in your career?
I have, but I would say the official mentors that I've had or that I've been assigned haven't really panned out, to be honest. What I find is it's probably best to consider a person who, in a particular context, you respect their skill and experience, and ask them, phone them up. Ask them a question that you're struggling with that you know them to be good at, and in that way create those informal relationships and get a whole suite of them. Have 5-10 people that you call for particular things that you struggle with. Go for a coffee with them or a virtual coffee, and nut it out. I think that is probably slightly more effective than being find a random stranger.
Mm. Do you attend many networking events outside of work?
Sometimes I'm an introvert, and so I find those events sort of loud and intimidating.
Yeah.
Uh, but sometimes I attend them. Yeah.
Do you think it's important for women to go out and attend these networking events? I know, like, someone was talking to me about the cloud meetups in Wellington. They were saying that maybe one or two women might turn up. And there could be several reasons. It could be a young family, or it just could be there are more men there anyway, so why turn up sort of attitude. Or, as you say, most of us in technical roles are introvert, and so we probably need to also be more comfortable in that environment. But if we don't go and attend them, obviously it is going to be more male dominated. We are just going to miss out on those networking opportunities. But at the same time, they're not very conducive enough for all of us to go and participate in them. What are your thoughts on that?
Off the top of my head, I mean, I agree with the sentiment that you have there. I agree that it's important to be seen. I I understand that people's lives don't allow them to always do that. There can be barriers to coming along. I think it's probably incumbent on the people organizing the events to
Mm.
ensure that one, that they have ideally the same number of men and women speakers. Sorry, I shouldn't be so binary about that, but they have lots of genders available. So at least one woman speaker, ideally equivalent of the men. And that they create those events in different times of the day to suit different lifestyles, that they consider how, like, observe, are you in your event only getting men? Interesting. What networks do I need to chase? How can I increase the number of women attendees? Do I need more women speakers? Do I need to reach out to, I know in Wellington, Wahine Field Tech has a lot of women attend their events. Can I partner with them to get the speaker along to encourage the pool? So I think there's only so much that an individual woman can do. Maybe bring a buddy would be my advice to help you feel safer. Convince somebody to go with you. Yeah, but I think it's probably the organizer of the events that need to create the change.
Cool. Now, looking back, what are you most proud of in your career so far?
Honestly, lately I'm most proud of this work. I mean, I've got examples of stories. Projects that I've managed that I'm proud of the results we've achieved. I'm proud of the fact that the team feel proud of their work. But actually, this work is creating change that is going to impact society. Like, that is exciting. So this is the work I'm most proud of and what keeps me going. Yeah.
Nice. Now,
I wanted to go back
sorry.
actually to the earlier question about how as a woman of color you're able to approach other people in power,
Yeah.
because you don't see women of color in power. So how are you going to approach them? And I can't understand your experience, so I can't be that person, but I probably can connect you with people that know, and I can certainly be an ally for your experience and tell your stories. So whether that's you or somebody more junior in their career, I think there will be allies out there, and you probably know who they are, who can connect you with the right people or who can advocate for you, even though they can't understand your experience. So I don't want to suggest that you need to be a woman of color to advocate for and promote women of color. In fact, one of the things we're thinking about at TradeMe at the moment is making sure we have diversity in our Women in Tech working group, which is the core group of people that are have the ideas and are creating change. So we wanted to make sure that we do have women of color, and also white men is something that I just noticed we don't have. And I'm going to do something about, because you don't need to be that. Isn't it sad that the people that are most impacted by these issues are the ones doing all of the work, right? Wouldn't it be nice if it wasn't, if it was the people in the positions of power that are doing the work.
What message would you like to leave for young women aspiring to enter into tech industry or grow in leadership roles?
Just do it. Like, do you like maths? Do you like problem solving? If you don't, and I do hear even very young girls saying that they don't like maths, and I'm fascinated by that because statistically, I don't think it can be true. So what I'm interested in is how are they coming away with that feeling? Who is telling them or suggesting to them that they don't belong? Is it what they're seeing on TV or whatever media they're watching? Make sure that they're watching the right things. Make sure that you don't like math. Why is that? What about maths don't you like? And I think if you ask enough questions, you'll probably get to the fact that it's not that they're not good at maths. It's that they've had a poor classroom environment or somebody has suggested something. So question yourself and your self-beliefs. Are they real or are they a product of your environment and your society? And then once you've done that sort of introspection, and if you still are, you like problem solving, you like structured thinking, you like logic, do consider a technical role. I know there is a big push to be clear that to be in technology, you don't have to be in a technical role. And I think that's super important to create general representation. But my mission is to find women and girls into technical roles because that is actually where they're missing. So it's not those other roles that they're missing in. Those are super important, and I hope we don't lose women from those, but they need to look at technical roles. So really consider the impact that you can make. Imagine that story that I told about the VR goggles not fitting. What if you were on the team that designed those VR goggles? And what if you put them on and you were feeling motion sickness and you're like, oh, this is really weird, and like talked about that and got that team to think differently? We would have a whole generation of students that were able to learn better if you were on that team. Imagine that kind of difference you could make. So I'd really encourage people to see the change that needs to be made and how they can play a part in making that change.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy, for your time. It was truly inspirational to see a hugely responsible role that you have as a head of engineering, as well as more actively participating in increasing diversity within the sector. It's just absolutely fabulous to see a woman like yourself playing two roles at the same time and having the commitment to make a change. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
No final thoughts, just as well, thank you for creating this platform and telling the stories of women, getting them out there so that their voices are heard, and so that there is a whole chorus of those voices. I know that your participants are from diverse backgrounds, and that's amazing, and we're creating like a library of stories, not one or two. That's incredible work, so thank you.